everybody, it's Thursday.
And welcome to this week's edition of The Night Bite.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Emily. And thanks to you guys for being here with us tonight.
Yeah. Hey, how are you going?
We always start out with a fishing report.
Yep.
And I guess we are here to talk spring fishing. So, that's kind of an exciting thing. So as we talk about our report, I guess, let us know where you guys are at and how fishing is going for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because quite frankly, water temperatures are all over the place right now.
Yeah, in the last couple weeks, they have been, we've had, fishing mid 70s, and then it crashed down to 59 degrees, and then we were fishing like 63 or 64 last weekend, and so we're looking at a warm up this weekend again, so we'll see those water temps skyrocket back up, but yeah, we'll see what happens.
But I think with that warm up and that sun, that is the kind of thing that gets fish moving again, because that cool down really did cool them down. But that sun gets them back going, and I'm excited because, quite frankly, I think there's some good spots for us to be looking for fish.
Yeah, I think so. We've ground a couple out, and not just bad days for kind of what we're used to, but we did catch some fish. Good. We put some puzzle pieces together. We're a lot like a lot of you people watching. You have just the weekend to fish, and so when you can put those together and try and put together some stable weather, that can be a recipe for success.
And the fun thing is, it is an extended weekend coming up for many of us. And so normally we have 2 days of fishing, but this weekend there are 3. Except for Josh told me that I'm not allowed to go fishing all 3 of those days. So.
Me. Yeah, I guess so.
So I guess with that, are you going to make your announcement in the beginning, or are you going to make people wait till the end?
I don't know.
Well,
do you guys really want to hear about it now, or should we just keep talking about spring fishing?
What are we gonna do? Just wait and see. Well, what do you think?
I don't know. Until somebody decides to chime up, I guess we'll talk about spring fishing. So when we've been out doing some white bassing. I don't got too much to talk about with that, just because.
Well, yeah, we do. We do, because when Josh was talking about putting the puzzle pieces together, that's one of the places that we've really been doing that. So, I guess I can, give an honest, I don't want to say like opinion or something, but the thing is, everyone hears about the white bass run that oh, it's so crazy and you catch coolers full of fish, and now I'm finally watching people chime in. That's so funny. I don't know what the lag time is between what you guys are hearing and what we're hearing. Well, then go for it. I'll come back to white bass.
Well, so over the last couple, we'll get to that, Pete. So over the last couple months, probably a year and a half now, Emily and I have been looking for a new place to live.
For a lot of reasons.
Yeah, I think
the studio needs a new house, the boat needs a new house, our fishing stuff needs a new house.
Yeah, just something that we love our current house, but it just doesn't work for our current lifestyle, and so we just need to kind of transition over into something that worked a little bit better for us. And a couple weeks ago we found that house, and it was kind of, we didn't really know at first, and then we waited a week and we were like, well, let's just put an offer in, and that was accepted. Luckily.
It wasn't quite that easy. Josh is making this sound very much easier than it was.
Well, then you tell your version of it.
No, yeah, Bill Young, you're chiming in. I'm secretly glad that you're listening, because I've been meaning to stop by, because you are our neighbor, and hey, you're about to see our sign pop up in front of the house. So if anybody knows anybody that wants to buy a house, hey, you hit us up. But as far as the new house, we were actually really excited and kind of I don't know, like out of sorts a little bit last week for the show. So we were talking to Michaela from Aqua Weed Stick, and I had like totally have to apologize to her because we were like so on pins and needles. Yeah, waiting for the answer. Like we had all the offers out and all of that last Thursday, and we were like literally during the show, like waiting to hear. And so, oh yeah. And so after we found out, and so it's been an exciting journey since. But one of the crazy things is that we are going to have to move in this process. And so I know we have a show already scheduled for next Thursday. So we will still be here and we will be chatting with you guys and all of that stuff. But the things behind us might end up being in transition, or there might be like a week or two or whatever where we are unable to be here because maybe we are like literally in transit. So, we will keep you guys updated and what that looks like. But if there is a week or two that we miss, just know that we miss you as much as you miss us.
Well, and we might, in some of we'll try our best to get the shows on and just come out here and hang out with you guys. But might not be as much for scheduling people. So it might just be a lot of us just updating you on what's going on. But I think that's pretty exciting in and of itself.
That's exciting. Yeah, it's kind of exciting.
But tell them what we found out after we had the accepted offer.
Yeah. So I guess kind of even in the process. I mean, one of the things with buying a house is there's like, like a name on that and all of. So anyways, we found out that because, we live in an area of Wisconsin where, there's a lot of great fishing to be had, but with that ideas come. And from there, sometimes a great company is born. And so in this case, Josh is wearing kind of a little spoiler in the end of the story, but we found out that the house was actually owned by the owners of the Suick Lure Company. So, originally Mr. Suick, and I wish I knew the entire history. Maybe we should interview them, get them on the show and hear all about it.
Yeah. So the long and the short of it is that great grandpa developed the lure up in Anago. They owned a bar called the Muskie Bar, and they developed this muskie lure. And because back then it was a lot of trolling around suckers. And it took a lot, if you've ever fished with a sucker for muskie, you have to let them take it a long time. And sometimes it's hard to hook them. They wanted to figure something out. He had a fish farm and he went out to feed the trout. And he noticed that the trout would attack the dying ones that would kind of go away from the net and then float back up. And the other trout would like pick at it. And so he developed a lure that would do that. And it had an adjustable fin so that you could adjust the different depths and stuff. And it just kind of took off. And then his son John, which his nickname is Pete. I don't know that story, but so Pete Suick kind of took the company over and ran it out of the house not out of the house, but out of that area. And he lived in the house that we are going to buy. So we're going to move into Pete's house. Unfortunately, Pete passed away this last 2021. But his sons and his grandson now run the company. And so we were super thrilled because, you guys know that Emily and I are tackle people. Like we like to produce our own tackle and produce our own rods. And, it's going to be really, really cool to be in a house with so much angling history, especially angling history with such deep ties to Wisconsin, and kind of keep that energy going in that house. We've had a few email virtual interactions with Mike, one of the grandson of Pete. Seems like a really cool guy, and we can't wait to meet him. But yeah, we are super excited to move into the Suick estate.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So that is super exciting. And we're looking forward to, building a studio there and bringing all of this to you from that location.
Yeah. Well, and so on their website, I got to show you guys because this is like one of my favorite things. So on their website, they have a run of 400 of the muskie thrillers. And it's the Sure Strike. So it has the hooks come off when you get, or the hooks kind of just pop off the end of the lure. And it's really cool because they made a round of 400 where they put the signatures on. So you have John Pete Suick, you have Steve his son, and then Mike his grandson all sign this lure, and it's number 96 of 400. And so we ordered one off their website, and Mike was so awesome to just send it to us, and he didn't even tell us he was doing this, and he sent it to us, and he was like, we can't wait to meet you guys. Thanks for being such awesome people. And it was just like so telling of their family's friendliness and just like love for angling. And it's going to be really cool to be part of that tradition now.
That is absolutely true. And inviting all of you guys to be a part of that too, because we'll be there each Thursday, well, a Tuesday of all of those shows. So we are definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah.
And Bill Young, you should still come visit us there. Oh my goodness. So anyways, like hit us up about that because that's really exciting.
Yeah.
But otherwise we will keep you guys updated. But otherwise, should we go back to fishing?
Yeah, I mean, so
well, wait a minute, because that's a really great point. Like we're talking about our shows are going to change and all that, but actually, for those of you that tune in and want to hear me always talk about the Wolf River, because that's inevitably what I always talk about. I mean, we are still going to be visiting the Wolf River, and especially in all of these different runs and situations, the seasons. There's sometimes where you cannot turn away from it, you know, but maybe we're going to hit up the Wisconsin River, or otherwise there is a fabulous system of lakes all the way up by where we are going to be. So depending on if that's local to you or if it's your vacation spot, or you just want to know kind of what we're up to in that area, at some point our fishing reports are going to change a little bit as well.
Yeah. So we'll be up by the Anago area. If we didn't say that.
But for now, we are still right down by the Wolf River. And, you know, Josh before I was kind of poking fun at him because he said, I don't even know what to say about white bass. But I think that's part of the reason that we should talk about white bass is because, quite frankly, like, well, this is what I was exactly saying before. You hear everyone all the time, oh, it's so easy. It's so easy. You bring coolers full of fish home. Like, it's just crazy what you hear about all of these white bass. And so honestly, like I've gone out maybe like only once or twice, but for the last 2 years and like not honestly done well at all. And in some cases, like totally skunked on white bass. Some days you just like switch tactics and go fish for something else, you know? But I think there's a lot of reasons that was happening. And so like talk about what didn't go well and what did. So where do you want to start with that?
I don't know. I mean, we kind of tried to do what everybody else was doing, right? That's kind of always the first place that you start is nothing draws a crowd like a crowd. And, you know, as pan fishermen, like especially with a passion for ice angling, you know, you want to get away from the crowd. Open water, I feel, is very similar. But that's always a place to start. You know, there's a reason people are in those spots. It might become apparent very quickly that it's not the right spot. They're just there because that's where they always go. But sometimes there is something to that. So that's kind of where we started. I just didn't feel like tying a bunch of flies up and making special rods for the pumping flies. And so I was bound and determined just to be casting around like little spinner guys and twisty tails and stuff like that. And yeah, we just learned a little bit about kind of like the current, which current seams the white bass like to run. We started noticing different pockets where some people would be sitting, and then there would be a big gap, and then there's a whole bunch of people, and then there's like one person off to the side, and like those little different current seams were the people fishing the way that we wanted to fish, and that's what we started noticing after we actually found some.
So I mean, I guess that's like a whole lot there. But I mean, I think that's exactly kind of the whole story that we went through is, you hear, first of all, like, oh, you can only catch them on a Wolf River rig. And, you always think of people right in the middle of that river system in that current. And so you kind of got to assume, oh, if you can also use like spinner rigs, like, are you also mid river? Like, how do you deal with the current? I mean, it brings up so many questions. And that's the funny thing about being on the river is because then you get there and like Josh was saying, you see people doing like practically one of everything. And it's like,
Mhm.
are you all catching fish or what's going on here? Like you feel like you're the only one that doesn't know, the secret or something like that. And so actually what had happened is we had spent all that time like observing and hearing about the tactics. And I mean, like generally we know how to fish. We do that every weekend. And so the thing is like we had taken, I guess, almost too much stock in Facebook or online, reports, and people are like, "Oh, you can get them anywhere in the river," but I think that's almost too general. And so what happened is that we had chose a few different spots, and we ran into actually Troy Peterson of Mr. Bluegill Guide Service, and I think that first of all, he must have judged us because it was like that one moment of your boat, like your whole day goes great and smooth and awesome. But then that one moment that like there's havoc and like whatever, something crazy's going on. And that's like what he pulled up on us. We're like, ah. But that's the thing is he's a nice guy. He didn't judge us for that, or at least not out loud. But he did mention, I know what you're looking for. Why don't you try this other spot downriver? And honestly, it was way farther south than we had ever been, so it was kind of an adventure for us. We didn't tell him that. But when we got to ultimately this spot, we realized a few different things. Is first of all, the place that we were sent to was like way more shallow and way less current than anything we had ever heard online about what you should do. And so I think that threw us off quite a bit. But that's one of those cases where we are good at observing what's going on because ultimately, I am shocked to hear this or see this or do it, but there are people using bobbers. And so I don't know if that's a thing. Like there's like a secret white bass by bobber fish, bobber fishing group. But that is what we did. And so what we were able to then see though is, in this case, or at least last weekend, 2 weekends ago,
Last weekend.
yeah, the white bass were coming in for those bobbers kind of earlier in the day, and it did go through the day, but then it picked up again a little bit in the evening. That midday is when we noticed people were drifting the river, and that's when they had those flies. And so that's where that application thing, and Josh talking about the puzzle pieces, that's where this all comes together. Because yes, you can catch white bass doing with bobbers, with spinners, with Wolf River rigs, with whatever you throw out there. Because ultimately it's a pretty aggressive fish. I mean, it's not that they're like crazy, but they're out there to eat. They're flying through the system. They bite like a bass. And so it's just about the right application for the right time. Wes is asking a bobber with what? The funny thing is, I think last weekend where we were at had still a smidge more current than like the people next to us. And so I think that in some cases, when you are in that right spot, like color, plastic, bait, whatever, like throw something down there and find out because it might be working. For us, we found that I think we had to kind of get that attention. And so we were finding like bright colors early in the day, something with not too much body. Like we found ourselves cutting down the plastics, but something still with a wiggly tail. But I think that was the thing is I'm not giving a specific bait because we weren't necessarily matching what each other was using. As long as it was that right color and it was that body that we could pinch down with that tail, that's something that was working. But I do have to say we both switched colors a lot throughout the day.
Yeah, just to switch it up. I mean, we were fishing kind of like it would be super bright and sunny for about 2 hours, and then we'd have this big cloud bank roll in, and then get dark. But really we ended up just using what we use for crappies, just, a little bit deeper, probably about halfway down the water column. But yeah, just like a 32nd ounce jig. And, I found I had my most success came off of like chartreuse and something that's kind of reminiscent of like a Bobby Garland, you know, shad pole or whatever. It's a minnow profile is what you're looking for. I don't have any of the Bobby Garland ones, but that was that minnow profile with a tail on it, um, and like chartreuse, and you just like pop it back to the boat, and you just let it drift down current until your bobber was parallel with the boat, and then you reeled it back and cast back up and let it float. And yeah, it was really fun. And the other fun thing about that is that we didn't really we had lots of breaks from white bass, but we didn't really have that many breaks from fish. We caught perch, we caught sheephead, we caught pike, we caught smallmouth, all just sitting there they're all eating the little minnows, in that little current seam. So that was pretty fun just to be able to throw the bobber out there and, not know what's going to come.
Well, and I actually appreciate Wes had the last 3 comments here, and I'm actually going to kind of reference them all right now. So we just did talk about the bobbers, and you do seem kind of surprised, which honestly, like when we plopped down in that spot, we were like shocked. We're like, this is never going to work, but we were told to do it, and so we did, and so it was awesome. But Wes is also mentioning those like demon spinners from shore. You can do this on shore. You can do it on a boat. The funny thing is when the fish are going to those shallow areas, you can reach them whichever way you prefer. But I think that is the big difference, is just kind of the awareness, because I was going to say the awareness of the situation, because what's going to happen here is like our bobbers, and we had people just down the road that were using spinners. And so I think the difference there, though, is how fast or how slow that you are choosing to fish or what they are biting on. And so I think like a spinner is like definitely eye-catching, but it is a faster fishing method than like letting the bobber float through the system. So, I mean, you got to consider the conditions there too. So last weekend we had that big cold front coming in. Those white bass are moving through the system, and they might kind of stop in those little local areas because those water temps are cooled down. But I mean, they might not be eating that most aggressive fish that's coming through, that little minnow that's swimming like crazy, and so that's where that bobber really comes into play. But like Josh is saying, we had that sun kind of rolling through, and that's when I think those people with those spinners were doing pretty okay. When that sun would come through, those fish seemed to just move that little bit more. But again, it's about kind of matching that technique with the situation that the fish are biting on.
Well, and then as we came up, because we were fishing a really long current seam, and so you have those really steep corners, that are like that, and then you have a really short current seam, and then you have blocks in the river, like where sandbars come up, or like there's a patch of cattails that kind of jut out into the river, not quite making a point to make an eddy behind it, but enough to slow the water down and make kind of a long eddy. And those are those areas that I think that technique would do very well. And we found probably 3 or 4 of them on our way back up through Fremont, all the way back up towards Red Banks. That whole stretch, there's probably like a half a dozen of those spots that you could get there. And there's plenty of room for probably, 3-4 boats in those spots to be able to do something like that. And quite honestly, not many people were fishing them. The other thing that we've kind of learned is that people aren't lying when they say you can catch them all over the river. It just depends on, I think, a lot time of day, and I think a lot where the fish are in their spawn. And this year was probably one of the most tough years to go out there and try and get fish, because the fish were on and then they're off, and then they're on and they're off, and they're on and they're off. There wasn't this constant flow for 2 weeks and then up and back. So that's kind of tough. The nice thing about it, it's extended the season a little bit. There's still people catching plenty of white bass, and I've also heard that during the day, like you were saying, people were drifting the mid river with either jigs and minnows or flies or whatever, and catching fish. And now I hear the larger females are being caught that way, but the females are starting to slide up into those shallow areas towards in the evening and the morning, where most of the time you were just catching males, and you're still catching males pretty much all day. But now some of those bigger fish are starting to slide up in those eddies, which means that they're probably on their way back down. And so there's fish crossing paths all day long. But just, you gotta apply some of the things that you hear on social media, and then apply your observations and persistence, especially with a new species that you're not familiar with. You can't really get frustrated, because at the end of the day, it's like fishing, right? So, like, I love fishing. Fishing's like my jam. Someone likes catching, and it's not a bad thing. Like, I like catching too, but I'm very much like, I like putting all the pieces together, and sometimes that can be a little slow for some people. But it all works out at the end.
I just know
too.
that, like, if we're not catching white bass, then there's crappies and bluegills in the system the time of the year that I would go and find those instead.
Well, and the nice part about both of us being in the boat is that I do, because of how much observation there is to make out there, I can get stuck observing like a whole day. Like, I'll just take a whole day and just observe, where Emily will point out things that I would probably miss. It would take me like probably a week of straight fishing to like get that, because I couldn't get through the rest of it, right? So,
Hey, Eric.
there's a good balance in our boat. The energy is always very not competitive,
Mismatched.
but it's
No. Oh my goodness. But I mean, I wasn't joking, because if white bass are not biting, or if you go out there and you try it and you are getting discouraged, there are other fish to catch. So whether it is panfish, I mean, there's still walleyes floating through that system and all kinds of ways that people are catching. So,
yeah.
Are you going back to Pete's comment?
Yeah, Pete, are you still with us?
But way earlier in the show, he asked, what is our favorite way to fish for crappies post spawn? And the funny thing is, like, in some places they're like just getting to spawn, so make sure that you hit that first, well, or leave them be, and then get to them after, but know where your water temps are at, so you know where those fish are at.
Yeah, so my favorite post spawn crappie tactic has to be trolling, hands down. I love trolling crappies. I love trolling crappies so much that I had a hand in designing a twister specifically for trolling crappies. And I've been working on a lead head specifically for trolling crappies. And so it's I don't know. I mean, I think one of the things that I like so much about that is that you cover so much water, right? You don't, because it's really crazy, because there's so many, when crappies school up so much, that you can find a spot and catch crappies for hours
Sometimes,
as long as they're sticking in a spot. You can sit there and whack on them, but that's not the only school in the lake. Even just a 40-acre lake has multiple schools staged up around the lake, sitting on similar structures, because there still is just a limited amount of food in one area. So they seek out the similar patterns, and you can find multiple schools by trolling. And so, you go out in the morning, you troll around till lunch, you'll find maybe a half a dozen schools, and you can pop a waypoint on those spots and go back and cast around if you want, or you can keep trolling around in a circle and keep trolling and trolling and trolling. And then every time you come up to a spot, then you're like, oh, we're going to get some fish. And it's like, don't. And then you get to reel it in, throw it back, cast it out as fast as you can. Do the same thing.
That's what I was going to say right there, is that trolling is good for, well, I guess a few things. And so one of them I was going to say is getting to know a lake. So not everybody has every day or every weekend to be out and fish and follow the fish and know where they're going and all of that. So the trolling allows you to cover that water in it, but that's the second part, in a way that allows you to identify the trends. And so exactly like Josh is saying, you can start to like mark it on your graph. You catch a bite, push that button, watch where that is. Is it a depth? Is it a weed line? Is it a point? Look for those different trends. Maybe it's the water temperature, but again, if you have that graph, if you have those points, you can start to put those pieces together to kind of see where you want to pinpoint.
Well, and I think going even like less technology than that, I think trolling, as long as you have a trolling motor, bow mounts works best. But
And a
if you
jig and a
even
plastic.
if you have any kind of trolling motor and you have a jig and a twister tail or a jig and a paddle tail, like all you need to know is depth. And if you don't have the depth, then all you need is a pair of glasses, polarized sunglasses, so you can see where the weeds stop. And I don't mean like, that there's a hole in the weeds or anything. I mean like the edge of the weeds where there's a wall and then there's deeper water. And so as long as you can find that and you just put your boat on top of it, one of the sides of the boats is going to get bites and the other side isn't. And then you just adjust your distance away until both sides of the boats get bites on your passes. And yeah, it's a super fun way to fish. It's super fun for kids because there's no casting involved. There's no treble hooks. The fish most of the time set the hook themselves.
Well, and so actually talk about how we do this. So we're like, oh, it's just as easy as like a jig and a plastic, and we throw it out there. But then that's what happens to us. People will describe a technique, and then you get out there and you're like, wait, what? So like literally, it's as easy as you take your rod, and then you do like a very light little like lob cast, dunk, just like toss it right out there, like barely, just or just drop it like right there, and then I do like one long like let out that much line like a swipe. You don't have to make the sound effect. I know that's what you're laughing at. I know that's, but that's the thing, because either that's going to work or it's not. And if you don't get a bite soon, then let a little bit of line out. But you don't want too much, and don't go crazy because you don't need all that much. But if you'll find that point like very quickly of where you get that bite. And sometimes it'll surprise you because like Josh said, you don't even have to set the hook. All of a sudden you just feel that weight there and you can literally like pick it up,
Well, and a good place to start is with a 16th ounce jig head. They're easy to find, and two, it'll put you in kind of the middle of sink rates for pan fishing, right? So the heaviest jig that I'll run for panfish is like a 1/4 ounce. Maybe just the step up from that, but that will be the heaviest. And then the lightest is like 1/80th. And I don't troll with those. Like anything under 1/32, that's strictly for bobbers. But you control 1/32 to that 1/4 ounce, and most of the time it'll be 1/32 to 1/8 ounce. And you can adjust the amount of line that you have out with your rod. So what Emily's talking about is you open your bail and then you do one arm plus a rod length, and that's all that is doing is giving you a standard of measurement with how much line you have out generally. So if you do like
I don't do the arm length, I just do the rod length.
So if you do drop your line, pull the line out once, and you're moving forward, or hopefully you should be if you're trolling, then your line will flatten out and do 2. And if you start, and that's approximately 12 to 15 feet of line that you have out, and well, probably more 15 to 20 feet that you have out, and that's a good place to start when you're fishing in like 6 to 10 feet of water with a 16th ounce jig head. Eric brings up a good point, and that's where I was going to next, was your speed. So generally speaking, I keep my speed between 0.7 and 1.2, and it really depends. We miss you too, Jim.
Jim, you missed the news in the beginning, and we should chat after the show. You should hit us up.
So we generally troll between 0.7 and 1.2, and a good rule is that the warmer the water is, the faster you can go. Up to about 80 degrees. Once the water gets that, then most fish, at least most freshwater fish, start to get stressed out, and so their appetite will be a little bit. They'll tank off. They'll get a little stressed, and they'll find cooler water. But once, in that upper 70s, that they'll hit a 1.2 like moving bait. You can even go up to like a 3-inch paddle tail sometimes, if you
Oh, and
really
don't
want
be
to.
afraid to.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you can pull that stuff just along the weed edge, and don't be afraid to go out deeper too. If you go out deeper and you don't want to let a pile of line out, just up your jig head size. Summertime, that doesn't like unless you're fishing up shallow where fish have a long time to look at your slow presentations. Jig head size doesn't really play that much of a difference in the trolling game because it's moving so fast. They have no time to decide, like, oh, well, that jig head looks weird on that minnow. Like, it just is a flash that's going by. And so, hopefully, with help that we got from, well, we went and worked with Aquaview, and they paid us with a camera for a week's worth of work. so we went down there, and they were awesome, and they helped us get a camera for trolling this year. And I am dead set on getting some trolling footage of crappies because it is something that I've always wanted to watch, just to see how they approach bait. I know that they ambush stuff a lot. But
I can imagine it in my head already. I know what it's gonna look like.
well, do they the majority of the time? Like, do they just ambush it?
Yeah.
Or do they follow it at all? And those are the things that I want to see. I want to see how they react to a bigger bait versus a smaller bait, and just make those distinctions. Another thing that I've done before is if you've ever watched some bass fishing, they peg nose weights. You can do nose weights and a smaller jig. If you're fishing, like, let's say you're fishing like a bug hatch and they're eating smaller baits, not so much minnows. You can do that. You can put one of the little rubber stopper, put a weight on, put a rubber stopper, and run 2 feet of line and troll that way. That way you have your extra weight to get down a little deeper, but then you're also presenting a small presentation. So there's all kinds of stuff. I could probably write a book on trolling for crappies, and I still could talk about it.
Another great basic point about this though is, I mean, it's one of those times where you don't need to have like every plastic in the store or every plastic that you see online, because ultimately Josh had mentioned in the beginning a twisty tail and a paddle tail.
Mm-hmm.
Between those two, you are probably going to get it covered because you are going to probably want something with a little bit of action. I do think that makes a difference. But the other thing, as far as color, you don't need like every color under the sun, because in this case, like Josh was mentioning about the jigs, it's not necessarily about the fish sitting and analyzing what it looks like. It's about catching the fish's eye. And that's why when you were describing, like, do they follow the bait? And I don't think they do in the trolling case. I think that's why it's an ambush game, because you're looking to catch the eye of that fish. And that's, I think, why that thump is so hard, because you're trolling along and it's like, dunk, that fish gets it. They want to go right back down into the weeds or wherever they came from, the depths. It depends on, whatever's going on in the water. But in this case, for plastic colors, something like white will go a really long way for you in almost any watercolor clarity condition, things like that. In my tackle box, other colors that we go to all the time, chartreuse, something with hot pink. Wes is saying Kevin Clancy makes an amazing small twister tail. That is totally one of the ones that I use. That is totally it. And so often the Zax's Fire and Ice, it's like white with red glitter, is exactly one of the colors that I love to use for that. But I mean, I think that's the thing, is you use other plastics, you use other colors. And I mean, some days it makes all the difference and we're sharing with each other what color is working, what's not. But some days it like literally doesn't matter. And you can, like, whatever you have one left in your box that you're afraid to use on a different day, like, use it then.
Well, and Wes is making a great point that he doesn't even know. One thing that has really elevated our catch rate in trolling for crappies, is exclusively fishing with hand poured plastics. Because the thing about commercial plastic is that they have to run a super hard blend to run production plastic. There's no way to get around it. If you ran a softer blend, it would scorch and then you would have no baits. So they have to run a super hard blend, and it in the smaller baits, it just doesn't give the same action that like a medium blend or a medium heavy blend in a hand pour gives. And so this is one area that I won't sacrifice in, as far as like, oh well, I can go pick something up from Walmart. I'm not saying that those don't work, but if you want to catch like 4 fish, or do you want to catch 4 dozen fish? I mean, it's literally that big of a drastic difference, just because that plastic is so much more responsive in the water. And when you're not pulling that much weight and you're only pulling at like 0.7, like try taking your phone out onto the sidewalk and walk 0.7 miles an hour, because it's very hard to walk that. so I mean, it seems like the only way that you know that you're moving when you're going that fast is that your line is tight, you know. The other thing, when you're trolling for panfish, because this is applicable for bluegills too. Like big bluegills love a trolling presentation. Use a light power rod. Medium action is a really good action for kids, just because it's a lot softer. So when a fish hits it, there's not so much physical response that you have to get. The rod absorbs that strike, and they have better hookup rates. I like a fast action rod, just because I use rods for multiple. I use my JTX Mag Light for jigging walleyes, but then it's my summer trolling rod. So I use that rod for 2 different things, and that's what I like. I like that light power fast action is a great panfish trolling rod. And then when you get that surprise pike, or you get that surprise bass, or the surprise walleye,
or the surprise 10-inch bluegill,
yeah, then you have enough of that power behind it. I grew up drifting with ultralights, and as fun as that is, like, I've enjoyed trolling so much more, just upping that power a little bit in the rod.
The one thing that I will say, though, is if you do already have an ultralight at home, it's more than worth using it. Go out and try it. Excuse me. Because the other thing is, if you've not done this, excuse me, the other thing, don't rip the fish's face off. This is like so much different than bobber fishing. It's so much different than casting. It's so much different, because you have that momentum of that boat already moving. And so, like we're saying, you don't have to necessarily like set the hook, and because if you find yourself that you are doing that same motion as when you have like extra line out with your bobber, like literally you're going to feel like, whoop, nothing. Like you're going to set that hook and then that fish will be gone, because like, especially crappies, they call it like paper mouth, because it is so delicate. Some of that membrane is like so fine in there. And I mean, trolling is a great technique for it. But again, that ultralight, if that's something that you already have, is going to absorb that shock and help you kind of learn what this is like. So if you have that already, it is worth doing.
Yeah, that would also be a great rod for this application, that 7-foot panhandler. I don't have one, so I can't speak to the action.
Yes.
So I don't have one yet.
We'll get them.
But no, I mean, we do have our own ultralights that we like to use for pitching. That's super fun. That's probably my 3rd favorite thing. It would have to be trolling for crappies, bobber fishing for crappies, speed bobbers. If you know what speed bobbers is,
that's a different show.
And then pitching for crappies. Those are my 3 panfish, my favorite techniques.
Besides trolling, my favorite, I would say like bobbers, but different than Josh. He likes the shallow water spring bobbers, and my favorite is like midsummer over deep brush. Sometimes what you think popping at the top of the water is bass, and it is not. It is the big crappies, and that is where it's at.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
I'm excited for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's 45 minutes already.
It is. It has been. And it's funny that you mentioned speed bobbers because that is a very timely topic. So I know next week we already have something scheduled, and gosh, the weekend after might already be getting into summer fishing. But if it's not, then that actually might still be a relevant topic. So maybe
Yeah.
that's something that we'll bring to you. We'll see what that looks like. But if you guys have, other questions or comments or topics along the way, just let us know what that is because we would love to talk about that as well. Also, while you're here, just a reminder that we come to you live on Facebook, YouTube, and actually LinkedIn. And so no matter where you are at, make sure to go and like and subscribe and all those things because then it'll alert you when we're here to chat fishing and talk about all these crazy things. And we learn as much from you guys as you do from us, or hopefully you learn from us. Otherwise, we're glad that you come and have a good time with us because we definitely have fun with you guys as well. So.
Yeah, and we really appreciate it. Even if you don't tune in on YouTube and stuff, just if you have if you have a channel over there, just come give us a subscribe. It just helps our videos do better, and just helps us do the talks
Stuff
that we do.
do.
So, yeah, it was great chatting with you guys, and shoot us a comment or a message or something about the show on the speed bobbers, because if you guys are very interested in that, I will get some of my tackle out. We'll actually talk some tackle. I'll do a little show and tell, and maybe I'll even show you a way to do some bobber knots.
Oh,
That's a fun tip.
Cool.
So yeah, just let us know if that's something you're interested in, and I'll get that squared away. Otherwise,
looking forward to seeing you on next week's edition of the Night Bite.
Night, everybody.